Have you ever been playing with Create Mod and thought to yourself that you wish things were a little bit more convenient, or maybe that it would be so much better if you could make things behave in a slightly different way? Well, luckily there's a mod that adds a whole bunch of quality of life changes, and it's called Create Connected. The core focus of this mod is manipulating rotation with new kinds of gearboxes, clutches, and gear shifts. But there are so many other cool features as well, like new redstone components, horizontal fluid tanks, and more. Let's have a look at the features that this mod adds. If you've played Create Mod for any amount of time, you're probably familiar with the hand crank. You give it a spin and it produces RPM and stress units. The first thing that this mod adds is a new twist on the hand crank. It adds the crank wheel. So all this does is it combines the hand crank with a cog wheel. So you spin it, it gives the exact same amount of stress units and speed, but now you have a handy cog wheel to transmit rotation to the side if you want as well. And there's also a large crank wheel, which is the exact same thing, but in a larger format. So how can we put this new feature to use? Well, if you're playing basic Create Mod and you want to power a mechanical pump, you have to place a cog wheel on top of it, and then you have this awkward hand crank sticking out. So yes, you can spin it and it works, but it takes up the space of 2 blocks. So if we use the crank wheel that this mod adds, we can have more compact designs for our steam engines or anything that requires you to manually power a pump. And you can also do the same thing with the large crank wheel. So the next thing that this mod improves upon is the clutch. So in Create Mod, when a clutch is receiving rotation and there's no signal applied to it, it lets the signal through. But if we give it a redstone signal, it does not allow any rotation anymore. So what if we want the inverse? We want to have something where when we give it a signal, it goes, but if there's no signal, it stops. Well, we have to build something like this. So we have to have a redstone repeater, a block, and a redstone torch. So when there is no signal, our output is not spinning, but when we do give it a signal, it starts to spin. So there's nothing wrong with making a redstone setup like this, but the problem is that it takes up a lot of space and it's also vulnerable to getting washed away with water. So what this mod does is it adds the inverted clutch, and it works exactly as you'd expect. So when there's no signal, it does not let the rotation through, and when you give it a redstone signal, it lets the rotation through. So the inverted clutch, like a lot of the other features added by this mod, will allow you to make more compact designs. So the next thing we're going to have a look at is the gear shift. So the regular gear shift allows rotation through, and when you give it a redstone signal, it'll invert the direction of rotation. So what this mod does is it gives us the inverted gear shift, which by default changes the direction of rotation. But if we give it a redstone signal, it'll allow the rotation to go through without inverting the direction. So how can we put the inverted gear shift to use? Well, let's say we have a source of power and we want to send the power to either side like this. And we want it to be rotating in the same direction on each side. So imagine the wheels of a car. You have a drive shaft and you want to send power to each wheel. And you want to have an intuitive way of controlling that. Well, what you'd have to do is you have to add an extra gearbox here to re-invert the direction of rotation that's coming out of here. Okay, this is fine, but it's asymmetrical and it's an extra block. So what you could also do is forego the extra gearbox and just put a shaft. But to have them rotate the same way, you'd have to have one on and the other one off. Now this is fine, but what if you wanted to have an intuitive control? You don't want to have one off and one on just to have the same direction. You want to have both on is one direction and both off is the other direction. Well, you can use one inverted gear shift and then a regular gear shift, and then you'll have both working in the same direction. And then when you put both on, well, then they'll go in the opposite direction. They'll both be going in the same direction. So that's one way that you could use the inverted gear shift in your designs. So here's the gearbox that we all know and love. You give rotation into one side and it transmits that to the other sides. So what it's modeled after is a setup like this where you have 4 large cogwheels and they're each rotating each other. So one feature of this is if you have this cogwheel here, notice it's rotating counterclockwise. And if I go here 90 degrees around, it's turning clockwise and then again counterclockwise. So each time we go 90 degrees around, the rotation direction inverts. So this isn't a problem, it's just a feature. But what if we wanted something that behaved differently? What if we wanted each side to rotate in the same direction? So instead of this being counterclockwise and then this one being clockwise, they would all be clockwise or all be counterclockwise. Well, we could use a parallel gearbox. So the parallel gearbox is modeled after having a large cogwheel like this, rotating these small cogwheels here. The only problem is that in Create Mod, we can't currently lower the large cogwheel by half a block. If we go into the ponder for the parallel gearbox, we can see what this setup actually looks like. So we have this large cogwheel here and it's rotating these other cogwheels, and it gives us a setup where each direction of rotation as we go 90 degrees around is in the same direction. So looking at each shaft, it'll always be either clockwise or counterclockwise consistently for each shaft. So in this setup here, we have this cogwheel going clockwise, And if we go 90 degrees around, we also have it going clockwise, and the same thing with this other face here. So that's how the parallel gearbox works. And of course, we also have a vertical parallel gearbox, which is the same thing, but just in a vertical form factor. So there's also the 6-way gearbox, and this works just like the parallel gearbox, except that it adds 2 more shafts. And these shafts rotate in different directions than the other ones, and it also rotates at half speed. So up here we have 8 RPM, and here we have 16 RPM. And there's also a vertical 6-way gearbox, which works the same way, but it's just in a vertical form factor. So here on these sides, you have 8 RPM, and up here you have 16 RPM, or full speed and half speed. So I was a little bit confused as to why you would have to have a vertical 6-way and a horizontal 6-way gearbox, but the difference is that there's different shafts that are at half speed. So just keep that in mind when you're using the 6-way gearboxes. So what if we want absolute control over the direction of rotation for each output? Well, we go up a tier, we go to the brass gearbox. So you'll notice here that the light part is on the bottom. If I right click, the light part will be on top and the direction of rotation will change. So we can control the direction of rotation independently for each face. And of course, we can also change this on the input side. And when we do that, we change the direction of rotation for all the other sides. So the brass gearbox comes in a horizontal version and a vertical version. There is no 6-sided version, only 4-sided versions. So up next we have the shear pin. So all this does is that when your system becomes overstressed, it'll break and it'll protect the rest of your system from being overstressed. So again, if I place the shear pin here, you'll see it'll briefly become overstressed, but then it'll break, and it allows this part here to continue working even if the addition of this part overstresses it. So here we have some item vaults, and item vaults are great, but they have a little problem. If I place them like this, they can be horizontal, so all this is considered one vault. But what if I want to have this vertical? Can I just go like this and have one vault? Well, no, I'll have 2 separate vaults. I mean, that's weird because we can already place blocks with orientation. Like if I take a barrel and place it like this, or like this, it'll be upright or on its side. So why can't the item vault do that? Luckily, Create Connected fixes this problem by giving us the item silo. So this is a whole new block that is stacked vertically. So you can only stack it vertically, you cannot stack it horizontally. Instead of having one block with multiple orientations, it's just a new block. It's the item silo. So these behave the exact same way as item vaults, except they're vertical. So one application of the item silo is to have an easier way of moving blocks vertically. So here we have a block going inside of the funnel, and instantaneously it'll come out of the funnel right here. So to do this with an item vault, you would have had to have a 3x3 version, and you're essentially just wasting vault blocks to have a vertical system. And in a similar vein, we have the fluid tank, which can only be placed vertically. So what Create Connected does is it gives us the fluid vessel, which is just a horizontal version of the fluid tank. And another thing that I like is that it has this nice big window. And we also get a version for creative fluid tanks. So in Create Mod, we can use encased fans to bulk process items. So we can blow the fans over different things like campfires, soul campfires, water, or lava. So for example, if I take a piece of beef and I throw it here in this smoke, well, it's gonna get cooked. So there's different types of bulk blasting, but they have a bit of a problem because this fire is exposed. Here we have the water that can flood all over the place. And obviously we have lava that we can fall in, and that's a hazard. So we can mitigate some of the messiness of this system, for example, by waterlogging oak leaves so the water doesn't spill all over the place. But what if there was a better way? Well, Create Connected gives us the empty fan catalyst. So all this does is it neatly encases the campfires, the soul campfires, water, and lava so that they're not messy and they don't interact with the world. They only let the fan bulk process the items. And Create Connected also adds the fan freezing catalyst, though I don't think this is part of base Create Mod, so I'm not too sure what this is used for. Alright, so we also get some new redstone components, the first of which is the sequence pulse generator. So think of this as being like a sequence gear shift, but instead for redstone signals. So this thing can do a few things. First of all, we'll look at just setting an output for certain durations. So we set a certain amount of time in ticks, so each second is 20 ticks. So if you want half a second, you'd put 10 ticks. And of course, you put the redstone signal strength anywhere from 0 to 15. So here I've set it up to go from 15 to 10 till 3. So when I give it a signal by pressing this button, we'll see the output go 15, 10, and 3, and each output value lasts for half a second. Alright, so what else can we do? Well, we can also have an output that loops. So we can tell it to put a certain output, 1, then 2, and then loop 3 times. And then we can just scroll to adjust the value if we want. So it's switching between 1 and 2, and it'll do this 3 times. So in addition to telling it to loop for a certain amount of times, we can also tell it to loop forever. So once it gets a signal, it just loops through all of its outputs forever until we destroy the pulse generator. Even if the signal is on or off, it'll continue looping. Another thing we can do with the sequence pulse generator is tell it to wait until the input changes. So for example, I can tell it to wait for an on signal or an off signal, and then once it has that signal, it'll move to the next value. So we have on, off, off, and it's going to move from 5 to 6 to 4 to 3. So we're going to see what happens. So I press the button and 5 appears, and then now when I press it again, that's going to trigger it to move till 6. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to press this button, and that's going to trigger the next value, but immediately it'll go to the value after that because the button will be going to off. So we'll see it go from 4 till 3 when the button comes to off. And that's because here it says wait for off. So this is how to leave that state. So to leave the 4, you're waiting for the off signal. And the same thing for leaving the 3. So when I press this button, it's only going to move out from 3 when the button goes back to off. So it's on, no change, and off, and it goes back to 0. And finally, we can also have conditional loops. So this will go through a sequence from 3 till 6 to 9 to 12, and it'll loop only if the input signal is on. So right now it's off. I'll flick the lever and we'll see it go through. And then once it gets to 12, it's going to go back because this is on. And then I'll let it loop again, and then I'll turn it off, and we'll see that it will not continue looping, it'll just stop. So the next Redstone component on our list is the linked transmitter. So the linked transmitter works just like a regular Redstone link, except it only transmits and it has to be linked to a lever. So if I try to place the Redstone transmitter directly on the ground, it won't work. I have to place down a lever and then right click the lever with the transmitter. And now this works the exact same way as a regular Redstone link, and I can set the frequencies with items in my inventory just like this. So here I have this set up. This is the classic Redstone link, and you can see we're sending the signal directly to here, and the Redstone lamp lights up. And here I have the same thing set up with the linked receiver. And on the other end, I have a Redstone link. So these linked transmitters only transmit because they're connected to levers, and you have to set them up to communicate with a Redstone link by setting the frequencies. So this is another thing that allows you to have a more compact design. So there's still a few more technical blocks that we're going to have a look at, but first, let's look at the decorative blocks that this mod adds. So first off, we have some new windows. So we have the cherry window, which from a distance, it doesn't really look all that see-through, but once we get up close to it, we can see that it's kind of like a white tint here, and it kind of resembles those paper walls that we see in Japanese houses. And then we also have the bamboo window, which looks like this. The mod also adds 2 new music discs, and this mod also adds a whole bunch of copycat blocks. Now, you might be looking at my screen, and you might be saying, hey, wait a sec, up there it says Create Copycats Plus. Are you just showing us copycat blocks from another mod? And the answer is, well, kind of. So you see Create Connected actually has compatibility with Create Copycats Plus. So if you look here in my inventory, I clearly have a copycat block from Create Connected. It says Create Connected. But once I place it, it says Create Copycats Plus. And this makes it so that you have the blocks in one mod, but if you also have the other mod, you won't have 2 types of blocks laying around in your world. They'll all be from the same mod. So if I did not have Create Copycats Plus installed, as I currently do, it would just place the block and it would just place the Create Connected version of the block, which is actually identical. But I guess for probably compatibility reasons, or just to simplify your world, I'm not exactly sure the reasoning why, but they probably decided that it was just better to have it this way, and I guess it makes the mods more compatible. Or if maybe one day Create Connected removes the copycat blocks, well then you'll still have those in your world because they'll be part of Copycats Plus. So Create Connected adds the block, which I'm not too sure what the block is used for, since you can only add blocks to copycat blocks. So I guess why would you have this if you already need a block? I'm not exactly sure. You have slabs, which can also be vertical slabs. Then you have the beam, which sits at the center of a block. You have the vertical step, which can be placed in any of the 4 corners. You have the stairs, fence, fence gate, wall. boards, which look like blocks, and this here is a catwalk. So to show you how the copycat blocks from Create Connected compare to the copycat blocks from Create Copycats Plus, I've set this up right here. So on this side, we have the blocks that are from Create Copycats Plus, and here are the ones from Create Connected. So all the ones that I've just shown you, they have in common. The only ones that Create Copycats Plus has that are not in Create Connected are the trapdoor, the buttons, the byte, the layers, which can be stacked up, the pressure plates, the half layer, and the horizontal and vertical slices. So these ones are only in Create Copycats Plus, and all the ones that you see here are in both Copycats Plus and Create Connected. So let's say you have Create Connected and you've placed some copycat blocks and then you install Create Copycats Plus. Well, you can go into the config menu of Create Connected and you can set up how the blocks are migrated. So you can either have the blocks migrate on block update or when their entities are initialized. So these two checkboxes are checked by default, but you can also turn them off, for example, if you want to keep your regular Create Connected copycat blocks and not migrate them to Copycats Plus. And while you're in the menus, you can also go to the features and choose to enable or disable each of the features individually. And remember to click the save button to save your changes. Alright, so let's have a look at the last of the mechanical blocks in this mod. So this one here is the overstress clutch. So notice here I have a water wheel and right now I'm using 100% of the stress. So if I go and I add any more stress to the network, it's going to overstress. So you see it briefly overstresses, but it will uncouple. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, this part is overstressed. The rest of my network, I'm just going to uncouple it from there so I can have stress on that side of the network. So it's easier to see if, for example, I put another deployer here and let's say I get rid of 2 more. I'll press this button to reset the overstress clutch. So now my network is at capacity and I'm going to place another deployer. And you'll notice this part will be overstressed, but it's going to uncouple it. So it allows you to prioritize part of your stress network. So for example, you say, okay, if my network gets overstressed, I want this part to continue working and I want that other part to stop working. I'm going to sacrifice that part and focus on the other part. Okay, so what are the options for the overstress clutch? Well, you can click here and you can change the delay. So maybe you want it to uncouple after 1 tick. You can put it to seconds and you can even put to minutes, up to 1 hour. So I'll just leave it here at 1 tick because I want to uncouple it right away. And let's say I make some adjustments to the network. I just press the button, I give it a redstone signal, and it will recouple the network together. The next item is the centrifugal clutch, and this one is pretty cool. So here we have a water wheel and it's running at 8 RPM. You'll notice that this cogwheel is not spinning. That's because I've set the value on the centrifugal clutch to 9, which is higher than 8. And if I reduce it to 8, well, what's going to happen? That's 7. If I reduce it to 8, what's going to happen is it's going to allow the rotation to go through. So what this does is it kind of filters out what rotation is allowed to go through it based on the RPM. So what could be an application of this? Well, here I've got a steam engine. And I'm sure this has happened to you before. You've built a steam engine. Okay, you've got your hand crank that's ready to pump, and then the steam engine will power the network. And the pump, you've built the whole thing. You're getting ready to use it, and you turn your crank, and it's overstressed because you didn't think of this other part over here. You know, you designed it to have this crank power this pump. So what you do is you say, okay, well, I'm gonna break this. I'm gonna put a clutch here. So you gotta do that. You gotta start it up, and then once it's started up, you deactivate the clutch. Okay, that's one way of doing it, but an easier way is just to use a centrifugal clutch. So I know that this here only turns at 32 RPM. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set this to 33. So that way I can spin it and it's not gonna try to power this part here that would overstress it. So I'll just crank this up, and then once the steam engine starts, it's going fast enough to go through the centrifugal clutch so it's able to power the pump, and we're still able to use the hand crank to start up the pump. So that's what the centrifugal clutch is used for, or at least that's one use for it. Next, we have the freewheel clutch. So what this does is we just specify a direction of rotation and it'll only let rotation that's going in that direction through. So right here I have clockwise and it's not turning, and if I turn to counterclockwise, it's gonna go through. So this would be useful if you have something where you really don't want it to turn another way. You want to make sure that your rotation is going one way, so I guess you don't break your network or cause some unwanted operation. So this next item is the brake, and quite simply, when you activate it, it'll overstress your network. So this is a good way if you just want to have, I guess, a kill switch. You just want to stop everything that's going on. You can use a brake. It's different than a clutch, because if you have a clutch, it's only gonna stop the rotation on one side, right? This will affect your entire network, everything that's connected together. So how much stress does it provide? Well, here I have a creative motor and I've activated a brake, and that is enough to bring it to 100%. So if you have a creative motor and it has any load, one brake will be enough. Since we don't have any load at all, it'll take a second brake. So these provide a lot of stress. These cause a lot of stress to be consumed on your network, so much that you need two of them to stop a creative motor. All right, so I was wondering, let's say you've got something spinning using clockwork. If you have a clutch and a brake, will the brake stop whatever's spinning faster than the clutch? So I set this up, and as you can see, the answer is no. There's no difference, which is too bad, because I thought it would be cool to use these on a car, let's say, right? You want to stop your wheels, you can use these brakes. That would be kind of neater than using the clutch. Though I guess you would probably stop your entire network. So, well, I guess you would have to use a clutch just like a car, right? When you're stopping a manual car, you activate the clutch, and then you activate the brakes so you don't stall your motor. But there's no difference in how fast it stops the rotation, so I guess there's not really a point to doing that. So we can just keep using our clutches if we make cars with clockwork. And next we have the encased chain cogwheel. And what this is it takes the best parts of the encased chain drive and the encased cogwheel. So here I have some regular cogwheels, and the encased chain cogwheel will mesh perfectly with the regular chain drive. And you can even rotate it, you can flip it here and flip it back. And then when you place a cogwheel, well, it'll transfer the rotation perfectly. So this is really just a great little block that adds a lot of convenience if you already have an encased chain drive and you want to connect some cogs to it. And finally, we have the sequenced gear shift. This is an item that already exists in Create Mod, but they've added 3 new modes of operation. So you can turn until new redstone pulse, you can turn for time, and you can restart the whole sequence. You can loop. So let's see what this looks like. So right here we have, we'll do sustain, we'll turn until new redstone pulse. So I'll just give it a redstone signal and see what happens. So it turns, and then I give it another pulse, a rising edge, and it'll stop. Okay, the next mode of operation is turn for time. So this is just simple. You just turn for X ticks, right? So you just give it a signal, and, well, it's going to turn for half a second. So I don't know what this could be useful for, but maybe you have some application where timing's important, right? So you can say turn by angle, but you don't necessarily know how long it's going to take you to do that angle. So maybe you just want to turn, maybe you have a process, and I don't know, you just want to turn for a specific time. And the last thing that the sequence gear shift can do is just loop. So just like the sequence pulse generator, we can restart the whole sequence so we can do it again. So let's see what that looks like. So what we can do is we can tell it to turn by angle. We can say 90 degrees. And then here we can say turn, let's say turn 180 degrees in the other direction. That way we can see that it's actually working. That way we can visually see what's going on. And then we'll restart the whole sequence and we'll see what that looks like. So I'll go ahead and give it a signal. It's going to turn the other way. And immediately it's going to do the whole thing over. So if I take the signal away, will it continue? And it will. So that looks like it's just the loop forever from the sequence pulse generator. It's the same thing as having, I guess, a clock just re-triggering it manually. So this is just an easier way to have your sequence gear shift always be in motion. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial for Create Connected. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, then please consider subscribing and activating notifications. And I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support me there. Thank you for watching.